A werewolf romance written by Olivia Smith. Prologue. The night I agreed to marry the monster, my village smelled like smoke and fear. Ash drifted through the air like black snow, sticking to my lashes, my tongue, my skin. Children cried behind me. Old men argued in whispers. The torches shook in the wind, and every flicker of flame felt like a countdown. I stood at the edge of the stone bridge, with my hands clenched so tight my nails cut my palms, staring at the castle carved into the mountain like a wound that never healed. That was where he lived. The monster. The curse. The thing our elders warned us about when the moon went red and the firstborn stopped waking. I wasn't brave. I wasn't chosen by prophecy. I was the last option. They said the castle king demanded a bride in exchange for mercy. One life for hundreds. A marriage vow instead of bloodshed. I remember thinking how strange it was that terror could feel heavier than hatred. How the word wife felt sharper than death. When the iron gates groaned open and glowing eyes cut through the dark, I realized something far worse than fear. The monster wasn't supposed to know my name. But he whispered it like a prayer he'd been saying for years. Before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from. What country are you in, and what time is it there right now? Morning, afternoon, or midnight? I'd love to know. Drop it in the comments, then let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The Bargain. The elders sent me because no one else would go. Not because I was strong or noble or special. I was sent because my mother owed the miller grain we couldn't pay back, and my father had been dead 3 winters. I was expendable. That's what they didn't say out loud, but I heard it in the way they looked at me when the monster's messenger arrived. A girl with no dowry, no husband, no future. Perfect for a sacrifice. I stood in the village square with my arms wrapped around myself, shivering even though the air was warm. The messenger was a man in black armor who never spoke, only pointed toward the mountain. That was all it took. One finger. One direction. My life decided. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But when I looked at the faces around me, my neighbor's little boy, the baker's daughter, the old woman who sang lullabies at dawn, I knew I couldn't. If I refused, the monster would come down from his castle and take them all. That's what the stories said. That's what happened to the village on the other side of the valley 10 years ago. They found the bones in the fields, scattered like seeds. So I nodded. I said yes. And the crowd let out a breath like they'd been holding it for days. No one hugged me. No one cried. They just watched as I turned toward the bridge, my feet heavy as stone, my heart pounding so loud I thought it might crack my ribs. The walk to the castle took an hour, but it felt like falling. The path wound up the mountain, steep and narrow, lined with trees that didn't grow leaves anymore, just black branches clawing at the sky. The wind howled through them, a sound like wolves or ghosts or both. I kept my eyes on the ground, counting my steps, trying not to think about what waited at the top. But when I reached the gates, I had to look up. The castle loomed over me, all sharp towers and broken stone, windows like empty eyes. The iron gates were taller than 3 men, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. They looked old. Older than my village. Older than memory. And they were opening. Slowly. With a sound that made my teeth ache. That's when I saw him. Just his eyes at first. Glowing gold in the darkness beyond the gate, like 2 suns trapped in a storm. I couldn't see his face. Couldn't see his body. Just those eyes, burning through the shadows, locking onto me with an intensity that made my knees shake. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. It felt like he was looking through my skin, into my bones, into the part of me I kept hidden even from myself. And then, he spoke. His voice was low and rough, like stone grinding against stone, but there was something else underneath it. Something soft, something broken. He said my name. Aeryn. Not a question, a statement. Like he'd been waiting for me. Like he'd known I was coming long before I did. I opened my mouth to ask how he knew me, but the words wouldn't come. My throat was too tight, my chest too full of fear and confusion and something I didn't have a name for. The gates swung open the rest of the way, and the golden eyes moved closer. I still couldn't see him clearly, but I could feel him, the weight of him, the danger, the power. He stopped just inside the gate, still cloaked in shadow, and tilted his head like he was studying me. "You came," he said quietly. "I didn't think you would." His voice cracked on the last word, and for a second he didn't sound like a monster at all. He sounded like a man who'd been alone too long, a man who'd forgotten what hope felt like, and that terrified me more than his eyes ever could. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of pine and something metallic. Blood, maybe, or iron. I forced myself to stand straighter, to meet those burning eyes, even though every instinct screamed at me to run. "I'm here because my village needs me to be," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I'm here because people I love will die if I don't do this. So yes, I came, but don't mistake duty for willingness." Something flickered in those golden eyes. Hurt, maybe. Or respect. "Fair enough," he said softly. Then he stepped fully into the moonlight, and I saw him for the first time. He was tall, broader than any man I'd ever seen, wearing a cloak that seemed to be made of shadows themselves. His face was still mostly hidden by a deep hood, but I could see the strong line of his jaw, the sharp angle of his cheekbones. Human features. Achingly beautiful features, but wrong somehow. Too perfect. Too still. Like a statue come to life. "My name is Talon," he said, and the name sent a shiver down my spine. Not fear this time. Recognition. Like I'd heard it before in a dream I couldn't quite remember. "I know your name is Aeryn. I know you're 18 years old. I know you live in the shack on the edge of the wheat fields with your mother. I know you work from dawn to dusk trying to keep both of you alive. I know you sit by the river on the nights when it gets too hard, and you let yourself cry where no one can see." His words hit me like stones, each one landing with impossible accuracy. How could he know these things? How could he know me? How, I started, but he held up a hand and I fell silent. "I'll explain everything," he said, "but not here. Not now. You're exhausted. You're terrified. And you deserve better than to hear the truth while standing in the cold, wondering if I'm going to kill you." "Are you?" I asked, the question escaping before I could stop it. "Going to kill me?" Talon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "No, Aeryn. I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to marry you. And if you let me, I'm going to spend every remaining day of my cursed existence trying to make sure you never regret saying yes to this." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke me. I didn't understand it. Didn't understand any of this. But I could hear the truth in his words, could feel it in the way he stood so carefully still, like he was afraid any sudden movement would send me running. "Then I suppose," I said slowly, "you should show me inside." He nodded once, a sharp, grateful movement, and turned toward the castle. "Stay close to me," he said. "The castle is old and not all of it is safe. I'd never forgive myself if you got hurt on your first night here." As I followed him through the gates, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just crossed a threshold that would change everything. That the girl who'd walked up this mountain wasn't the same girl who would walk back down, if I ever walked back down at all. Chapter 2. The Girl Who Didn't Matter. I wasn't always the girl no one noticed. Once, a long time ago, I had a future. My father was a hunter, the best in the village, and he taught me to track deer through the forest and read the wind like a language. He showed me which plants were safe to eat and which would kill you, which streams ran clean and which carried sickness. He taught me to move through the woods like a shadow, to listen to what the forest was telling you. My mother baked bread that smelled like honey in summer, and people came from miles away to buy it. We weren't rich, but we were happy. I remember being 5 years old and believing the world was kind. I remember thinking I'd grow up, marry someone gentle, and raise children who never knew hunger. But that was before the sickness came. Before my father went into the woods one morning, and never came back. They found him 3 days later, deep in the forest near the old wolf territories, his body cold and his bow still strung. No wounds, no signs of struggle, just gone, like something had reached inside him and stolen the life right out of his chest. The healers said his heart just stopped. But I knew better. I'd seen the look in his eyes the morning he left, the way he kept glancing toward the mountain where the castle sat, the way he'd kissed my forehead and whispered, "I'm sorry, little bird. I'm so sorry." He knew something was wrong. He knew, and he went anyway. And he never came home. After he died, everything changed. My mother tried to keep the bakery going, but her hands shook too much to knead dough, and her mind wandered to places I couldn't follow. She'd stand at the window for hours, staring up at the mountain, whispering things I couldn't quite hear. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night and find her sitting by the cold fireplace, tears streaming down her face, her lips moving in silent prayers to gods that didn't answer. I took over. I was 12. I worked from dawn until my fingers bled, trying to make enough bread to feed us and pay our debts. But it was never enough. The miller wanted grain. The landlord wanted rent. The butcher wanted coins we didn't have. Slowly, piece by piece, we lost everything. Our home, our dignity, our place in the village. By the time I turned 15, we were living in a shack at the edge of the fields, and people looked through me like I was already gone. I became invisible. The girl who didn't matter. The girl no one would miss. I watched other girls my age get married, watched them smile and blush and plan their futures, and I felt nothing. No jealousy, no longing. Just a hollow acceptance that my life would never look like theirs. I would work until I died, probably young, probably alone, and no one would remember my name. That's just how it was for girls like me. Girls whose fathers died under mysterious circumstances, and whose mothers lost their minds to grief. That's why they sent me to the monster. Not because I was brave or because I volunteered. Because I was convenient. Because my death or my disappearance wouldn't cost them anything. I knew it. I felt it in the way the elder's wife handed me a cloak without meeting my eyes. In the way the blacksmith turned away when I walked past. In the way the children stopped playing when I came near, like I was already a ghost. I wanted to hate them for it. I wanted to scream that I mattered, that my life was worth something, that I deserved more than being traded away like livestock. But deep down, I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was nothing. Maybe this was all I was ever going to be. The night before I went to the castle, my mother held my face in her hands and cried. She didn't say she was sorry. She didn't say she loved me. She just cried, silent and shaking, her tears hot against my skin. I wanted to pull away. I wanted to tell her it wasn't fair, that she should have fought for me, that she should have been the one to go. But I didn't. I just stood there, letting her cry, feeling the weight of all the things we'd never say pressing down on my chest like a stone. When she finally let go, I walked out the door and didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I'd break, and I couldn't afford to break. Not yet. Not until it was over. I spent that last night sitting by the river, watching the water move in the moonlight. It was the only place I'd ever felt safe, the only place where I didn't have to pretend I was strong or useful or worth keeping. I thought about running. I thought about disappearing into the woods and never coming back. But then I heard the children laughing in the distance, their voices bright and careless, and I knew I couldn't. I couldn't let them pay for my cowardice. I couldn't let the monster come for them because I was too afraid to face him myself. So I made a choice. I decided that if my life didn't matter to anyone else, it would matter in this. In saving them. In being the one thing I'd never been before. Enough. The next morning I walked to the village square with my head high and my hands steady. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. I just nodded when the messenger pointed toward the mountain and started walking. And with every step, I told myself the same thing over and over. You are enough. You are enough. You are enough. Even if I didn't believe it, even if no one else did, I would make it true. I would walk up that mountain, face that monster, and save my village. And maybe, just maybe, I'd find something worth living for along the way. Or I'd die trying. Either way, at least I'd matter. At least for once in my invisible life. I'd be seen. Chapter 3. The Castle of Shadows. The inside of the castle was nothing like I expected. I thought it would be dark, cold, dripping with decay. A place where monsters lived and people died. But when the gates closed behind me and Talon led me through the courtyard, I realized how wrong I was. The castle was beautiful. Painfully, impossibly beautiful. The walls were made of white stone that glowed faintly in the moonlight, carved with patterns that looked like wolves running through stars. Intricate designs spiraled up the pillars, telling stories I couldn't read but felt drawn to anyway. The courtyard had a fountain in the center, still flowing after all these years, the water clear and cold, catching the moonlight like liquid silver. Flowers grew in the cracks between the stones, night-blooming jasmine that smelled like summer dreams, moonflowers that opened their white petals to the darkness, and something else I didn't recognize. Small blue flowers that seemed to glow from within, pulsing gently like tiny heartbeats. It didn't look cursed. It looked forgotten, like something precious left behind, like a palace that had once been full of life and laughter and light, now standing empty, waiting for someone to remember it existed. The beauty of it made my chest ache in a way I didn't understand. It felt like looking at a grave decorated with flowers, lovely and heartbreaking at the same time. Talon walked ahead of me, his shoulders tense, his hands curled into fists at his sides. I still couldn't see his face clearly. He wore a cloak with a deep hood, and shadows clung to him like they were part of his skin. But I could see his shape now. Tall, broad, strong in a way that made the air around him feel heavier. He moved like a wolf, silent, deliberate, dangerous. But there was something hesitant in the way he glanced back at me every few steps, like he was afraid I'd run, or afraid I'd stay. I couldn't tell which scared him more. He didn't speak. Neither did I. The only sound was the fountain and the wind, and my heartbeat thundering in my ears. I wanted to ask him why he brought me here, why he knew my name, why he looked at me like I was something he'd lost and found again. But my voice felt trapped behind my teeth, and I didn't know how to let it out. He led me through a pair of carved wooden doors into the main hall, and I froze. The hall was enormous, with a ceiling so high I couldn't see the top even when I craned my neck back. Chandeliers hung from iron chains, their candles burning with silver flames that didn't flicker. The floor was polished black stone, smooth as glass, reflecting everything like a mirror. I could see myself in it, small and dusty, and out of place in this magnificent space. Tapestries lined the walls, each one showing wolves in various poses, running through forests, hunting beneath full moons, howling at the stars, standing in circles like they were having counsel. But there was something wrong with them, something that made my skin prickle. The wolves had human eyes, sad eyes, lost eyes. Eyes that followed me as I walked past, pleading for something I couldn't give them. I shivered and wrapped my arms around myself, feeling smaller than I ever had before. "What happened here?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, but it echoed through the empty hall like a shout. Talon stopped in the center of the hall and turned to face me. For the first time, I saw his hands clearly. They were scarred. Deep, jagged lines that looked like claw marks, running from his knuckles to his wrists and disappearing under his sleeves. Old scars, and new ones, layered over each other like he'd been fighting the same battle over and over for years. He caught me staring and pulled his sleeves down quickly, hiding them, a flash of shame crossing what I could see of his face. "This castle was once the seat of the strongest wolf pack in the Northern Territories," he said quietly, his voice rough with memory. Hundreds of wolves lived here, trained here, raised their families here. We had councils in this hall, celebrations, ceremonies. It was alive once, full of voices and laughter, and the sound of paws on stone. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. And then I made a mistake. One mistake, and they all paid for it. The weight in his words pressed down on me like a physical thing. Whatever happened here, whatever curse destroyed this place, he blamed himself for it. Carried the guilt of it in every scar on his hands, every shadow that clung to him, every careful word he spoke. "This is your home now," he said, his voice shifting back to something more formal, more distant. "You can go anywhere in the castle except the east wing. The doors there are locked. Don't try to open them." His words were a command, but his tone wasn't cruel. It was tired, exhausted, like he'd said the same thing too many times before and knew it wouldn't make a difference. I swallowed hard and nodded, not trusting myself to speak. He studied me for a long moment, his golden eyes flickering with something I couldn't name. Regret, maybe, or longing, or fear. "You'll find everything you need in your quarters," he said. "Food, clothes, books, if you want them. Hot water for bathing. Whatever you need, just ask, and it will appear. The castle still remembers how to care for people, even if there's no one left to care for." The way he said it made it sound like the castle itself was alive, aware, watching. And maybe it was. He started walking toward a spiral staircase at the far end of the hall, and I followed, my footsteps echoing on the black stone. "You won't be a prisoner here, Aeryn," he said without looking back. "You'll be my wife, but you'll be safe. I swear it on everything I have left." The word wife hit me like a stone to the chest. I hadn't let myself think about what that meant, what it would require, what he might expect from me. My hands started shaking, and I clenched them into fists to make them stop. Talon must have heard my breath catch, because he paused on the first step and looked back at me. His hood slipped just enough for me to see the edge of his jaw. It was sharp, strong, undeniably human. But there was something else too. A shimmer in the air around him, like heat rising off summer stone. Like he wasn't entirely solid. Like he was holding himself together by sheer will, and one wrong word might make him come apart. "I won't touch you," he said quietly, and there was something almost desperate in his voice. "Not unless you ask me to. Not unless you want me to. You have my word, my vow. Whatever power I have left, I swear on it. You are safe from me." And then he was gone, disappearing up the stairs, his footsteps fading into silence, leaving me alone in the hall with the silver flames and the wolves with human eyes. I stood there for a long time, trying to remember how to breathe, trying to understand what I'd just walked into, and wondering why, despite everything, despite the fear and the strangeness and the impossibility of it all. I didn't want to run. I felt something worse. I felt curious. I wanted to know him, wanted to understand what could break a man so thoroughly he'd live in an empty castle for God knows how long, waiting for someone who might never come. I wanted to know why he knew my name, why he'd been watching me, why he whispered it like a prayer, and most terrifying of all, I wanted to know why some part of me, some deep and hidden part I didn't know existed, felt like it had finally come home. Chapter 4. The Dreams That Haunted Us. Both. I didn't sleep that first night. I couldn't. My room was more beautiful than anywhere I'd ever lived, walls painted soft blue like a summer sky, a bed piled high with furs and silk that looked like they'd never been used, a window that looked out over the valley where my village sat like a handful of scattered stones in the distance. There was a bathing room attached, with a copper tub already filled with steaming water that smelled like lavender, and something else I couldn't identify. Something wild, like pine forests after rain. A wardrobe stood against one wall, and when I opened it, I found dresses in every color imaginable, all in exactly my size. How did he know? How could he possibly know? But none of it felt real. I kept expecting to wake up back in the shack with my mother's quiet crying in the next room and debt collectors pounding on the door. Instead, I lay in a bed fit for a queen and stared at the ceiling, listening to the silence. It was too quiet here. No crickets. No dogs barking in the distance. No voices drifting through thin walls. Just wind and stone, and the faint sound of water moving somewhere deep below, like the mountain itself had a heartbeat. It felt like the castle was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for me to do something, to say something, to be something I didn't know how to be yet. I got up before dawn, unable to lie still any longer, and went to the window. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and I could see my village clearly from here. Smoke was rising from chimneys. People were starting their day, probably not even thinking about me, probably relieved I was gone, one less mouth to feed, one less problem to solve. The thought should have hurt, but it didn't. It just felt true. I pressed my hand against the cold glass and wondered if my mother was awake yet, if she'd slept at all, if she was standing at her own window, looking up at the mountain, wondering if I was alive or dead. I hoped she wasn't. I hoped she'd moved on already, quick and clean, like pulling off a bandage. It would be easier that way. For both of us. When morning came fully, I forced myself out of my room to explore. Talon had said I could go anywhere except the east wing, so I started in the west. I found a library that took my breath away. It was 3 stories tall, with shelves that reached the ceiling and a spiral staircase connecting the levels. Books everywhere. Thousands of them. More books than I'd ever seen in my entire life. Some were so old the leather bindings were cracked and the pages crumbled when I touched them. Others looked brand new, like they'd been placed there yesterday. I pulled one down at random and opened it, finding text in a language I didn't recognize. Strange flowing symbols that looked almost like they were moving on the page. I put it back carefully and chose another. This one was in my language, a history of wolf packs in the Northern Territories, detailing their hierarchies, their rituals, their laws. I settled into a chair by the window and started reading, hungry for information. Hungry to understand what this place was, what Talon was, what I'd gotten myself into. The book explained that wolf packs weren't just animals running wild in the forest. They were organized societies with alphas who could shift between human and wolf form, who lived for centuries, who had magic in their blood. The Alpha King was the strongest of all alphas, chosen not by birth but by the pack itself, recognized by a mark that would appear on their body when they came of age. The king's mate was equally important, a true mate, someone whose soul was bound to the king's before either was even born. When a king found his true mate, the pack prospered. When he lost her, or never found her, the pack fell apart. I read for hours, losing track of time, learning about pack bonds and mate bonds, and the ancient magic that held it all together. And slowly, pieces started falling into place. Talon wasn't just cursed. He was broken, cut off from his pack, from his magic, from everything that made him whole. And if what this book said was true, if he really believed I was his mate, then he'd been waiting for me his entire life, searching for me, dreaming about me. The thought made my chest tight and my hands shake, because I'd had dreams too. Dreams I'd never told anyone about, not even my mother. Dreams that started when I was barely old enough to walk and never stopped. I dreamed about golden eyes watching me from the darkness, about a voice calling my name in a language I didn't speak but somehow understood, about running through forests I'd never seen, chasing something or being chased, I could never tell which, about standing in a castle hall with wolves all around me, their eyes sad and pleading, and feeling like I'd forgotten something crucial, something that would explain everything if I could just remember. I'd thought they were nightmares. I'd thought my mind was playing tricks on me, mixing up my father's stories about wolf territories with my own fears about the monster in the castle, But now, sitting here in this library, reading about true mates and soul bonds, and the way wolves could sense each other across impossible distances, I realized the truth. The dreams weren't mine. Or they weren't just mine. They were his too. Somehow, impossibly, Talon and I had been sharing dreams for years, and I'd been too scared and too practical to even consider that they might mean something. I found him by accident that afternoon. I'd been wandering through the halls, trying to memorize the layout, running my fingers along the carved stone walls, when I heard a sound. A low, pained growl coming from behind a door I hadn't noticed before. My instincts screamed at me to walk away, to leave it alone, to go back to my beautiful room and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But something stronger pulled me forward, something that felt like recognition, like my soul knew what was on the other side of that door, even if my mind didn't. I pressed my ear to the wood and listened. The growl came again, followed by a crash and a string of words I couldn't understand. They didn't sound like any language I knew. They sounded older, rougher, raw and primal, like the kind of language wolves would speak if they could form words. I reached for the handle, my hand trembling so badly I almost couldn't grip it, and pushed the door open. The room inside was dark, except for a single shaft of light coming through a broken window high in the wall. Dust motes danced in the beam like tiny stars, and in that light, I saw him. Talon was on his knees in the center of the room, his cloak thrown off and pooled around him like a dark lake, his back to me. And I finally understood why he'd hidden himself, why he'd kept the hood up, the shadows close, the distance between us. His skin was covered in scars, not just his hands. Everywhere I could see. His back was a map of pain, claw marks that looked like they'd been made by something massive, bite marks that had healed badly, burns that looked like they'd never healed properly at all, just scarred over and stayed angry and red. But that wasn't what made me gasp. That wasn't what made me press my hand to my mouth to keep from crying out. It was the way his body shimmered. The way his bones seemed to shift under his skin, pressing against it like they were trying to break free, like something inside him was fighting to get out, and he was fighting equally hard to keep it in. His hands were curled into claws, his nails sharp and black, longer than any human's should be, and his breathing was ragged, desperate like he was drowning in air, like every breath was a battle he wasn't sure he'd win. I took a step back, and the floor creaked. His head snapped up, and he turned to look at me. His face. Oh God, his face. It was beautiful and terrible all at once. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass. A strong jaw covered in dark stubble. A mouth that might have been gentle once but was twisted now in pain. Eyes that burned gold and wild. Pupils dilated so wide they were almost black, with none of the warmth I'd heard in his voice last night. And there was something wrong with him. Something visibly, terribly wrong. His teeth were too sharp when his lips pulled back. His pupils were slits instead of circles. The bones in his face looked like they were moving. Subtle shifts that made him look more animal than man. And when he looked at me, I saw the truth written in every line of his anguished expression. He wasn't just a man. He wasn't just a monster. He was both. He was trapped between two forms, two selves, two natures. And he was dying. Slowly, painfully, inevitably dying, being torn apart from the inside out by a curse that wouldn't let him be one thing or the other. "I told you not to come here," he said, his voice strained, barely human, every word scraping out of his throat like broken glass. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway, staring at him, trying to reconcile the man who'd whispered my name so gently last night with this creature on its knees, fighting itself, losing. He pushed himself to his feet, swaying like he might collapse, his movements jerky and uncoordinated, and took a step toward me. "You shouldn't have seen this," he said, and there was something like shame in his voice, something broken and raw, and deeply, achingly human. "Now you know. Now you'll be afraid. Now you'll run. And I won't stop you, because you should run, Aeryn. You should run as far and as fast as you can from this place, from me, from whatever I'm becoming. But I wasn't running. I should have been. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around, to run back through the castle, through the gates, down the mountain, back to my village, back to my small, safe, invisible life. But instead, I took a step toward him, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, my hands shaking, but my feet steady, and I said the only thing I could think of, the only thing that felt true in this moment. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Who were you before this happened to you?" He laughed, and the sound was bitter and raw and full of so much pain it made my chest ache. "I don't remember," he said, and his voice cracked. "That's the curse, Aeryn. That's what she did to me. I don't remember who I was. I don't remember my pack, my family, my name before this one. I only remember fragments, pieces, flashes of a life that might have been mine or might have been someone else's. But I remember you." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and his eyes cleared just a little, the gold softening, the wildness receding. "I remember you. Every version of you, every age, every moment, every breath. You're the only thing the curse couldn't take from me. You're the only thing I know is real." Chapter 5. The memory that wouldn't die. I didn't leave the room. I should have. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get out, to put distance between myself and this man who was barely holding on to his humanity. But I couldn't. Because the way he said my name, like it was the only word he had left, like it was the thing keeping him tethered to this world, made something inside me crack open. Something I'd been keeping locked away for so long, I'd forgotten it was there. Hope. Or maybe recognition. Or maybe just the desperate, foolish need to be seen by someone, to matter to someone, even if that someone was a cursed man losing himself piece by piece. I sat down on the floor, right there in the broken light streaming through the window, my dress pooling around me, dust settling on the fabric. And I looked up at him. "What do you mean you remember me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt, my hands clasped in my lap to keep them from shaking. "How is that possible? I've never been here before. I've never seen you before last night. How can you remember me?" Talon closed his eyes and sank back down to his knees, his whole body trembling with the effort of holding himself together, of pushing whatever was trying to break free, back down, back inside, back into the cage of his bones. His hands pressed flat against the stone floor, claws scraping, leaving marks in the ancient rock. "I don't know," he said quietly, each word seeming to cost him. "I don't know how it works. I don't know why you. But you've been in my head for years. Longer than I've been cursed, I think, though time gets confused for me now. I can't always tell what happened yesterday and what happened a decade ago. But you're clear. Always clear. Your face, your voice. The way you smell like wildflowers and rain and something else. Something uniquely you that I don't have words for. I dream about you every night. I see you in the woods near your village, running between the trees like you're looking for something. I see you by the river, sitting on that flat rock with your feet in the water, crying where you think no one can see you. I see you in the village square, trying to make yourself smaller, trying to disappear into the background so no one will notice you. No one will ask anything of you. His words hit me like stones, one after another, each one sinking deeper into my chest, each one impossibly, terrifyingly accurate. How could he know about the river? How could he know about the flat rock where I went, when the weight of everything got too heavy to carry alone? How could he know about the way I tried to make myself invisible, to take up less space, to need less, to be less of a burden? I see you standing in the market, he continued, his eyes still closed, his voice taking on a dreamy quality, like he was watching it all happen right now behind his eyelids. You're maybe 10 years old and your father just died, and your mother sent you to buy bread even though you don't have enough money. The baker's wife looks at you with pity and gives you the bread anyway, and you hate it. You hate the pity more than the hunger. I can feel how much you hate it. I couldn't breathe. That had happened. Exactly like that. The baker's wife with her sad eyes and her too gentle voice, handing me bread we couldn't pay for, and me wanting to throw it back in her face, wanting to scream that we weren't charity cases, that we were just temporarily struggling, that we'd be fine. But I didn't scream. I took the bread and said thank you, and walked home with my face burning with shame. And no one knew about that. No one. I'd never told anyone how that moment felt, how it had marked me, how it had been the first time I realized we'd crossed over from struggling to pitied, from people with problems to people who were problems. How? I whispered, and my voice cracked. How do you know these things? Talon opened his eyes and looked at me, and I saw tears slide down his face, silver in the dim light, cutting tracks through the dust on his cheeks. I'd never seen a man cry before. Not like this. Not with his whole body shaking, his hands pressed to the floor like he was trying to anchor himself to something solid, his head bowed like he was praying to gods that had long since stopped listening. Because you're my mate, he said simply, like it was the most obvious thing in the world, like it explained everything. My true mate. The other half of my soul. Wolves know their mates the moment they're born. We can feel them, even across distances, even across time, even when we've never met. It's not rational. It's not logical. It just is. You were made for me, Aeryn. And I was made for you. That's how it works. That's how it's always worked for my kind. He paused, drawing in a shaking breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. But the curse stole my memories. It stole my pack, my family, my history, my name, everything that made me who I was. It took it all and left me here in this castle, trapped between forms, forgetting more of myself every day. But it couldn't take you. No matter how much else it stole, no matter how deep it burrowed into my mind, it couldn't take you. You're the only thing I couldn't forget. The only thing I know is real. The only thing that proves I was something more than this broken creature once. That I had a purpose, a destiny, a reason to exist beyond just surviving another day. His voice broke on the last word, and I saw his whole body convulse, like something inside him was twisting, like the curse itself was punishing him for speaking too much truth, for revealing too much, for hoping too much. I didn't think. I just moved. I crawled across the floor, my dress dragging through the dust, and reached out, placing my hand on his. His skin was burning hot, like he had a fever, like he was burning up from the inside, and the moment I touched him, he flinched. Not away. Toward. His whole body leaning into the touch like it was water, and he was dying of thirst. Like my hand on his was the first good thing he'd felt in a long time. Maybe the first good thing he'd felt in years. I'm here, I said, and I didn't know why I said it. I didn't know why it felt right, why it felt necessary, why it felt like the most important thing I'd ever said in my life. I just knew it did. I'm real. I'm here. I'm not leaving. Talon let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and he turned his hand over, threading his fingers through mine, careful despite the claws, gentle despite the shaking, holding on like I was the only thing keeping him from falling apart completely. I thought I'd lost you, he said, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes squeezed shut again. I thought I'd lost you before I ever found you. I thought I'd die here alone, forgetting even the dreams of you, forgetting that there was ever anything worth living for. We sat there like that for a long time, his hand in mine, the silence between us heavy with things neither of us knew how to say. The dust settled. The light moved across the floor as the sun shifted, and slowly, piece by piece, with long pauses where he had to stop and breathe and fight back whatever was trying to take him over, he told me the story. How he'd been an alpha king once, ruler of the strongest wolf pack in the northern mountains. How his pack had been hundreds strong, wolves from every territory coming to serve under him, because he was just, because he was strong, because he protected the weak and punished the cruel, and kept the balance between wolf and human territories. How a witch had come to him 15 years ago, demanding that he marry her daughter, claiming that their union would bring unprecedented power to both their bloodlines. How he'd refused because he already knew about true mates, already knew there was someone out there meant for him, already felt the pull of a bond he didn't understand but couldn't deny. How the witch had cursed him in rage, stolen his memories, scattered his pack to the winds, locked him in this castle, and condemned him to slowly lose himself until he became nothing but a mindless beast. "The curse has conditions," he said, his voice rough from talking, from crying, from fighting. "I can only break it if my true mate comes to me willingly, sees me for what I am, all of it, the man and the monster, and chooses me anyway. Chooses to stay. Chooses to love me despite everything." He looked at me then, his golden eyes full of fear and hope and desperation all tangled together. "That's why I sent for a bride. I didn't know it was you. I just knew I was running out of time. I knew that if I didn't find my mate soon, I'd lose myself completely. I'd become the monster they say I am. I'd hunt and kill and destroy, and I wouldn't even remember why I was fighting it, wouldn't remember that I'd ever been anything more than teeth and claws and hunger. But when you walked through those gates last night, when I saw you standing there with ash in your hair and fear in your eyes, and your chin lifted like you were daring the world to break you, I knew it was you. After all these years of dreaming, of searching, of hoping, you finally came. But I don't know what happens next," he said, and his voice dropped to almost nothing. "I don't know if you'll stay. I don't know if you can love something like me. I don't know if the curse will break, or if I'll die anyway, taking you down with me. I don't know anything except that you're here, and for the first time in 15 years, I can remember why I wanted to stay alive." He squeezed my hand gently, so gently despite the claws, despite the inhuman strength I could feel thrumming under his skin. "So I'm asking you, Aeryn. I'm begging you. Don't decide right now. Don't run right now. Just stay long enough to see me. Really see me. See the man I'm trying to remember how to be, not just the monster I'm fighting not to become. And then, if you still want to leave, I'll let you go. I swear it. I'll open those gates myself and watch you walk away, and I won't stop you. But please, please give me a chance." I looked at him, this broken, beautiful, terrifying man on his knees in a dusty room, holding my hand like it was the only thing keeping him alive. And I knew I'd already made my choice. I'd made it the moment I didn't run. The moment I sat down instead of backing away. The moment I touched him instead of recoiling. I didn't have words for what I was feeling. I didn't understand it. I didn't trust it. But I felt it, deep in my bones, in the same place where the dreams had always lived. "I'll stay," I said. "I'll stay and see you. All of you. And then we'll figure out what happens next." The relief that washed over his face was so profound it almost broke me. He bowed his head, and I felt his tears fall on our joined hands, hot and real and human. And I knew, sitting there in that broken room with this broken man, that my life had just changed forever. That I'd crossed another threshold, one even more permanent than the castle gates. And there was no going back now. Not for either of us. Chapter 6. The Truth in the Tapestries. I spent the next 3 days learning the castle, not just the rooms and hallways, not just which stairs led where and which doors opened into what, but the story hidden in its walls. Every tapestry, every carving, every stone told a piece of Talon's past. The history he couldn't remember was written here, preserved by whoever had built this place, left behind like breadcrumbs for someone to follow. For me to follow, I realized. This castle was waiting for me long before I ever walked through its gates. In the library, I found paintings of a young man with dark hair and golden eyes, standing beside wolves the size of horses, his hand resting on the head of the largest one, a silver wolf with intelligent eyes and a collar of dark fur around its neck like a mane. In the great hall, I found a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, so massive it must have taken years to shape, surrounded by names etched in silver that glowed faintly in the firelight. Names of wolves, names of alphas, names of the pack Talon used to lead. I ran my fingers over them, sounding them out in my head, feeling the weight of all those lives lost, scattered, forgotten. Hundreds of names, maybe thousands, all gone because one witch couldn't handle rejection. And in the garden, beneath the roses and the glowing blue flowers, I found graves. Dozens of them. Small stones with no names, just dates. I realized with a sick feeling in my stomach that they were the other brides, the ones who'd come before me, the ones who hadn't stayed. I knelt beside one of the stones, running my fingers over the date carved into it. 3 years ago. Another from 7 years before that. Another from 10 years ago. They'd kept coming, these brides sent or demanded or somehow summoned, and they'd all left. All run. All failed to break the curse, and each failure had pushed Talon closer to the edge, closer to losing himself completely. I wondered what they'd seen that made them run. I wondered if he'd shown them what he showed me, the transformation, the pain, the desperate fight to stay human. Or if he'd hidden it better then, if he'd had more control, more hope, more strength to pretend he was something other than a man dying by degrees. I found Talon in the training yard that afternoon, shirtless and covered in sweat, swinging a sword at invisible enemies. He moved like violence and grace combined, every strike precise and controlled, every step perfectly placed, flowing from one form to the next like it was a dance he'd performed 1,000 times. But I could see the way his body shook between swings, the way his breathing came too fast, too ragged, the way his eyes flickered gold and back to almost human, like he was fighting 2 battles at once, the one with the sword and the one inside himself. He looked so alone, so tired. Like he'd been fighting this war for so long, he didn't remember what peace felt like. Didn't remember what it was like to exist without constantly bracing for the next wave of pain, the next loss of control, the next piece of himself slipping away. When he finally noticed me, he lowered the sword and wiped his face with the back of his hand, leaving a streak of dirt across his cheekbone. "You're staring," he said, and there was the smallest hint of a smile in his voice, the first time I'd heard anything like humor from him. It made him seem younger somehow, less like a cursed king, and more like a man who might have laughed once, might have joked, might have been happy before everything fell apart. "I found the graves," I said, and the smile disappeared. Talon's jaw tightened, and he turned away, setting the sword down with a heavy clang against the weapon rack. "They left," he said quietly, his back still to me. "All of them. Some after a day, some after a week. One lasted a month before she ran. I don't blame them. I wouldn't stay either if I had a choice." His voice was flat, empty, like he'd said the words so many times they'd lost all meaning, like he'd carved out the part of himself that could feel anything about it and left only this hollow acceptance behind. I stepped into the yard, the sun warm on my skin, the smell of sweat and steel and earth filling my lungs, and I crossed my arms. "Did you ask them to stay?" I said. He looked at me surprised, his eyebrows drawing together. "What? Did you ask them?" I repeated, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. "Did you tell them the truth? Did you let them see you, really see you the way you showed me? Or did you just lock yourself away and wait for them to run? Did you give them a reason to stay? Or did you just assume they'd leave?" Talon stared at me like I'd slapped him, his mouth opening and closing, words failing him. "It doesn't matter," he finally said, but there was no conviction in it. "They all left. The result was the same regardless of what I did or didn't do." "It matters," I said, and my voice came out sharper than I meant it to, almost angry, though I didn't fully understand why I felt so strongly about this. Because I'm still here, and I need to know if you're going to let me see you, let me know you, let me help you, or if you're going to hide until I leave too. I need to know if you actually want me to stay, or if you're just going through the motions because the curse demands it, waiting for me to fail like all the others. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and raw and uncomfortably honest. Talon's hands curled into fists, his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might break his teeth, his whole body going rigid like I'd struck him. Then, slowly, deliberately, he walked toward me. He didn't stop until he was close enough that I could feel the heat radiating off his skin, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to look him in the eyes, close enough that I could see the war happening behind those eyes, fear and hope and desperate, aching longing, all fighting for dominance. "You want to see me?" he said, his voice low and dangerous, vibrating with barely controlled emotion. "You really want to see all of it?" "Fine, look." And then he let go. The control he'd been maintaining, the careful facade of humanity he'd been clinging to, just dropped away like a curtain falling. His body shifted, bones cracking audibly, muscles rippling and reforming under his skin, and for a second I thought he was going to turn into a full wolf. But he didn't. He stopped halfway, frozen between two forms. His face was still mostly human, but his eyes were pure gold now. No whites at all, glowing with their own internal light. His teeth were sharp when his lips pulled back, canines elongated into fangs that would tear through flesh like paper. His nails were claws, black and curved and deadly, and his skin seemed to glow faintly in the sunlight, like he was made of more than just flesh and bone, like there was something else inside him trying to burn its way out. He looked like a god from ancient stories. He looked like a nightmare. He looked like the most beautiful, most terrifying thing I'd ever seen in my life. "This is what I am," he said, his voice rougher now, more growl than words, scraping out of a throat that wasn't entirely human anymore. "Half man, half wolf, half alive. I'm dying, Aeryn. The curse is killing me. Every day I lose a little more. Every day I forget a little more. Soon I won't even remember my own name, won't remember why I'm fighting, won't remember you. And when that happens, I'll be nothing but a beast. I'll hunt. I'll kill. I'll destroy everything I ever loved, everything I ever tried to protect. So if you're going to run, run now, before I can't let you go. Before the wolf takes over completely and decides you're mine, and won't let you leave even if the man wants to." His words were a warning, a plea, a desperate, broken confession that cost him everything to say. And I should have run. Every instinct honed by years of survival, by growing up poor and powerless, and always one disaster away from complete ruin, should have sent me running. But instead, I reached up and placed my hand on his chest, right over his heart. It was beating so fast I thought it might explode. A frantic drum beat against my palm, and I could feel the heat of him, the barely contained power, the way his whole body was trembling with the effort of staying still, of not grabbing me, of not giving in to whatever the wolf wanted. "I'm not running," I said, looking right into those inhuman golden eyes, seeing the man and the monster and refusing to flinch from either. "I'm not running, Talon. I'm staying, and we're going to figure this out together. Do you hear me? Together." For a long moment he just stared at me, like he couldn't quite believe I was real, like he thought I might disappear if he blinked. Then his eyes fluttered closed and he leaned forward, pressing his forehead against mine, his breath hot against my face, his whole body shaking with something that might have been relief, or might have been despair, or might have been both. "You're going to break my heart," he whispered, so quietly I almost didn't hear it. "You're going to make me hope, and then you're going to leave, and it's going to destroy me." "Then I won't leave," I said, and I felt the truth of it settle into my bones. "I won't leave you, Talon. I promise." And even though I didn't fully understand why I was making that promise, even though I barely knew him, even though everything about this was impossible and terrifying, I meant it. I meant it with everything I had. Chapter 7. The Witch's Return. The witch came at midnight exactly 1 week after I arrived at the castle. I was in the library, reading by candlelight, trying to understand the history of wolf magic and mate bonds and curses that bent natural law. Talon had told me pieces of his story, but there were gaps, things he couldn't remember, things the curse had stolen, things that didn't make sense even to him. I thought maybe if I learned enough, if I understood the mechanics of what had been done to him, I could find a way to help him. I could be useful. I could be more than just another bride waiting to run. I was so focused on the ancient text in front of me, so lost in descriptions of soul bonds and magical anchors, I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear the footsteps. I only looked up when the candles all went out at once, plunging the room into absolute darkness. My heart jumped into my throat, and I stood so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent library. "Talon?" I called, but my voice sounded small and frightened, swallowed by the dark. A low laugh echoed through the room, cold and cruel and distinctly female, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Not Talon," a woman's voice said, dripping with amusement, "but close enough. I am, after all, the reason he exists in his current form. You could say I made him what he is today." The candles reignited all at once, but the flames were wrong. Green instead of orange, casting sickly shadows that made my skin crawl, that made the library look less like a sanctuary and more like a tomb. And standing in the center of the library was a woman I'd never seen before. She was beautiful in a way that felt wrong, too perfect, too sharp, like a knife wrapped in silk, like something that looked like art, but cut like a weapon. Her hair was black as midnight and fell in perfect waves to her waist. Her eyes were violet, a color that shouldn't exist in human eyes, glowing faintly in the green light. And she wore a dress that looked like it was made of shadows themselves, shifting and moving even though there was no wind, like it was alive and hungry. She smiled at me, and it didn't reach her eyes. Didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "You must be the new bride," she said, circling me slowly like a predator sizing up prey, her movements fluid and unnatural. How sweet, how temporary, how utterly predictable. I swallowed hard and forced myself not to back away, forced myself to stand tall even though I wanted to run, wanted to scream for Talon, wanted to be anywhere but here. "Who are you?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady and mostly succeeding. She tilted her head, amused, her violet eyes glittering with malice. "I'm the reason your monster exists, darling. I'm the witch who cursed him. Morrigan of the Black Woods, though I doubt he remembers enough to have told you my name. The curse is quite thorough about removing inconvenient details from his mind." She stopped in front of me, so close I could smell her. Roses and rot, perfume and decay, beautiful and horrible all at once. "I wanted to see you for myself. To see the girl who thinks she can save him. The girl who thinks love is stronger than magic. The girl who's stupid enough or desperate enough to stay when all the others ran." My blood turned to ice. I'd heard about her from Talon, the witch who'd destroyed his life because he refused to marry her daughter. But I thought she was long gone. I thought the curse was the last thing she'd done, her final act of vengeance before disappearing back into whatever dark hole she'd crawled out of. I was wrong. She was still here, still watching, still waiting. "What do you want?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to show the fear that was clawing up my throat. The witch laughed again, that same cold sound like breaking glass. "Want? Oh, nothing much. I just wanted to see you up close, to smell you, to taste your fear and your hope and your ridiculous faith that this will somehow work out." She reached out and touched my face, her fingers ice cold, and I flinched but didn't pull away, couldn't pull away. Some part of me knew that showing weakness now would be fatal. "Let me tell you a secret, little bride," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, her breath cold against my ear. "The curse can't be broken. Not really. Oh, there's a condition written into it, a technical loophole that makes it look fair, look possible. True mate, willing choice, acceptance of both natures, blah blah blah. But here's what they don't tell you about curses this old, this deep, this rooted in blood magic and spite. Even if he remembers who he is, even if you stay, even if you love him with every fiber of your being, it won't matter. Because he's not just cursed, he's broken. And broken things don't heal. They shatter. Her words wrapped around my chest like chains, squeezing until I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there and listen to her poison. Every hope I'd started to build. You'll watch him die, she continued, her voice soft and cruel. Slowly, piece by piece. You'll watch him forget you even as you're standing right in front of him. You'll watch him turn into a beast that wears his face, and he'll kill you without even knowing who you are. That's how this ends, sweet girl. That's how it always ends. The curse doesn't break, it just transfers. And you'll spend eternity trapped in this castle with a monster who once loved you but can't remember your name. I wanted to believe she was lying. Wanted to believe this was just a mind game. Just her trying to make me run like all the others. But there was truth in her words. I could feel it. Could feel the weight of real knowledge, of understanding the curse in ways Talon didn't. In ways I couldn't. But I didn't let her see me break. I lifted my chin and looked her in those violet eyes and said, "You're wrong." The witch raised an eyebrow, intrigued, her smile widening. "Am I?" "Yes," I said, and my voice came out stronger than I felt. "Because I've seen him. I've seen what he's fighting. I've seen him on his knees, barely holding himself together. And you know what I saw? Someone who's survived 15 years of your curse and is still here, still fighting, still hoping. That's not broken. That's stronger than anything you could ever be. That's more powerful than any magic you could cast." The witch's smile vanished. For a second, just a second, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise. Anger. And underneath both, something that looked almost like fear. Then it was gone, replaced by cold indifference, by the mask of cruel amusement she'd been wearing. "We'll see," she said softly, her voice carrying a promise. "We'll see how strong you think he is when the moon goes full next week and the wolf takes over completely. We'll see if you're still so confident when he's trying to tear your throat out and doesn't remember why he shouldn't. We'll see if love really is stronger than teeth and claws and the hunger of a beast that's been caged too long." And then she was gone, dissolving into smoke that smelled like burning roses, leaving nothing behind but the green flames that burned for hours and the cold certainty that she'd be back, that this wasn't over, that she'd been watching, waiting, and now she knew I was here, knew I wasn't running, knew I might actually be different from the others, and that made me dangerous to her plans, made me something that needed to be removed. I stood there in the library long after she'd gone, my hands shaking, my mind racing, her words echoing in my head. Broken things don't heal. They shatter. And I realized with horrible clarity that she might be right, that staying might not save Talon, that love might not be enough. But I also knew I wasn't leaving, even knowing I might fail, even knowing he might kill me, even knowing the curse might win. I wasn't leaving him to face this alone. Chapter 8. The Wolf That Hunts at Night. I didn't tell Talon about the witch's visit. I tried. I opened my mouth a dozen times over the next 2 days, tried to find the words to explain that Morrigan had been here, had threatened me, had told me the curse couldn't really be broken. But every time I started to speak, I saw the hope in his eyes, fragile and desperate and growing stronger each day I stayed. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't give him another reason to think this was hopeless, another reason to think I'd leave, another weight to add to the crushing burden he already carried. So I kept it to myself. But her words stayed with me, heavy and sharp, cutting into my thoughts every time I looked at him. Broken things don't heal. They shatter. I started watching him more closely after that. The way his hands shook when he thought I wasn't looking. The way he flinched when I got too close, like he was afraid he'd hurt me, like he didn't trust himself to be near me. The way he spent hours in the East Wing, the one place he'd told me not to go, doing God knows what. I wanted to ask. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to know what was in that locked wing that made him disappear for hours and come back looking more exhausted, more haunted, more like a man fighting a losing battle. But I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd find. Afraid that the witch was right. Afraid that knowing the truth would break something between us that hadn't even fully formed yet. 3 days after the witch's visit, I couldn't take it anymore. I waited until Talon went to the East Wing just after sunset. Then I followed him. My heart pounded so hard I thought he'd hear it, thought his wolf senses would pick up on my presence, and he'd turn around and send me back. But he didn't look back. He walked through the castle like a ghost, his shoulders hunched, his steps heavy, like he was carrying the weight of the world. When he reached the locked doors, he pulled a key from his pocket and opened them with hands that shook so badly it took him 3 tries to get the key in the lock. I hid behind a pillar and watched as he disappeared inside, the door closing behind him with a soft click that sounded like a cell door closing. I counted to 10. Then I followed. The East Wing was colder than the rest of the castle. So cold I could see my breath misting in the air, and it smelled like iron and earth and something else. Something wild and animal and wrong. The walls were bare stone, no tapestries, no carvings, no beautiful forgotten history. Just emptiness and cold, and the sense that something terrible happened here regularly. I walked down the long hallway, my breath misting in the cold air, frost forming on the stones beneath my feet, until I reached another door. It was open just a crack, and light spilled through, warm orange firelight that looked welcoming from a distance but somehow felt ominous up close. I pushed it open and stepped inside, and I saw it. The thing Talon had been hiding. The thing he didn't want me to know. In the center of the room was a cage. A massive iron cage, big enough to hold a full-grown wolf, the bars as thick as my wrist, covered in symbols that glowed faintly red in the firelight, and inside it, the floor was covered in claw marks. Deep gouges in the stone that must have taken inhuman strength to make. Bite marks on the bars themselves, metal twisted and dented from the inside. And blood. Not a lot. Not enough to suggest anything had died here. But enough to know that whatever was in this cage regularly hurt itself, trying to get out. I stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the cage, my mind trying to make sense of what I was seeing, trying to understand what this meant. Talon was standing beside it, his back to me, his hands gripping the iron bars so hard his knuckles were white, his whole body rigid. He wasn't moving. He wasn't speaking. He was just standing there, staring into the cage like it was a grave he'd been forced to dig for himself, like it was his future spelled out in iron and blood and claw marks. I took a step forward, and the floor creaked. Talon spun around, his eyes wide, his face pale, all the color draining out of him as he saw me standing there. "Aeryn," he said, and his voice cracked, broke completely on my name. "You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't see this." "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, though it echoed in the stone room. He looked at me for a long moment, then back at the cage, and his shoulders slumped like the fight had gone out of him, like he was just too tired to keep pretending everything was fine. "It's where I go," he said quietly, each word heavy. "When I can't hold it back anymore. When the moon rises and the curse gets stronger, and I start to lose myself." "Hold what back?" I said, but I already knew. I could see it in his eyes, in the way they flickered gold even now, in the way his hands were shaking, in the way his whole body looked like it was wound too tight, like something was going to snap any second. "The wolf," he said. "Every night, when the moon rises, the curse gets stronger. I start to lose myself. My thoughts get hazy, confused. My body starts to change. And if I don't lock myself in here, I'll hunt. I'll kill. I'll become the monster everyone thinks I am. I'll do things I can never take back." His voice broke on the last word, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking, his hands coming up to cover his face. "I didn't want you to know," he said through his fingers, his voice muffled and broken. "I didn't want you to see me like that, like a beast in a cage, like something that needs to be locked away for everyone's safety, like an animal instead of a man." I walked toward him slowly, my heart breaking with every step, with every tremor I saw running through him, with every word that told me just how much he hated himself, how much shame he carried. "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been doing this?" 15 years, he said, and the words came out flat, dead, like he'd said them so many times they'd lost all meaning. "Every single night for 15 years. I wait until moonrise. I lock myself in the cage. I ride out the change. And in the morning, if I'm lucky, I remember enough of who I am to unlock the door and pretend to be human for another day." I reached out and took his hand, pulling him away from the cage, forcing him to look at me, even though he didn't want to, even though I could see how much it cost him to meet my eyes. "You don't have to do this alone," I said. Talon shook his head violently, his eyes wide with something close to panic. "Yes, I do," he said. "Because if I don't, I'll hurt you. I'll kill you. And I'd rather die than hurt you, Aeryn. I'd rather lock myself in this cage forever than risk even the possibility of hurting you." "You won't," I said, and I didn't know where the certainty came from, but I felt it deep in my bones, felt it in the same place where the dreams had always lived, where something had recognized him before I ever knew his name. "You won't hurt me. Because I'm your mate. You said so yourself. You said I'm the other half of your soul, and if that's true, then the wolf knows me too. He won't hurt me. He can't." Talon stared at me like I'd lost my mind, like I'd just suggested we both jump off the castle tower and hope we'd grow wings before we hit the ground. "Aeryn, you don't understand. When I change, I'm not me anymore. I'm not rational. I'm not gentle. I'm a predator, and you're prey, and every instinct I have will be screaming at me to hunt you, to claim you, to—" He cut himself off, his jaw clenching, his whole body going rigid. "I can't risk it. I won't risk you." "I don't care," I said, cutting him off, my voice firm. "I don't care what you become at night. I care about who you are right now, and you are not a monster. You're a man who's been fighting a curse for 15 years, and you're still fighting, still hoping, still trying to protect people even when it means locking yourself in a cage every single night. That's not a monster. That's a hero. That's someone worth staying for." Tears slid down his face, and he pulled me into his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe, his face buried in my hair, his whole body shaking. "You're going to get yourself killed," he said, his voice muffled against my hair, broken and desperate. "You're going to get yourself killed, and it's going to be my fault, and I don't know if I can survive that." "Maybe," I said, wrapping my arms around him, holding him just as tightly. "But I'm not leaving you. I'm not letting you face this alone anymore. Do you hear me? You're not alone anymore, Talon." That night, when the moon rose, I stayed with him. He tried to make me leave. He begged me to go back to my room, to lock the door, to stay safe. But I refused. I sat outside the cage, my back against the cold stone wall, wrapped in a blanket I'd brought with me, and I watched as the change took him. It was horrible. More horrible than I'd imagined, even after seeing hints of it before. His bones cracked and shifted, the sound echoing through the stone room, making my stomach turn. His skin rippled like there was something underneath trying to break free, trying to tear its way out. His face twisted into something between man and wolf, his jaw elongating, his teeth sharp and gleaming in the firelight. He screamed, a sound so full of pain and rage and despair that it made my chest ache, made tears stream down my face, made me want to run to him even though I knew I couldn't, knew the cage was there for a reason. And then he collapsed onto the floor of the cage, gasping for air, his body still shifting, still changing, caught between two forms, and fully neither. When he looked up at me, his eyes were pure gold, wild and feral, with no recognition in them at first. Just hunger. Just instinct. Just the wolf looking out through Talon's eyes and seeing prey. For a second, I thought I'd made a mistake. I thought the witch was right. Thought he wouldn't know me. Thought I was going to watch him try to break through the bars to get to me. But then he spoke. His voice was rough, barely human, more growl than words, scraping out of a throat that was wrong shape for speech. But it was still his. Still Talon. Still the man who'd been dreaming of me for years. "Aeryn," he said, and he reached one clawed hand through the bars toward me, the gesture so achingly human despite the inhuman hand making it. I didn't hesitate. I took his hand in mine, feeling the heat of him, the sharp points of his claws pressing against my skin, but not breaking it, not hurting me, and I held it until the sun came up. I talked to him through the night, telling him stories about my childhood, about my father, about the village, about anything I could think of. And he listened. Didn't always respond. Sometimes the wolf was too strong, and he could only growl or whimper or press himself against the bars like he was trying to get closer to me. But he listened. And he didn't hurt me. Didn't try to. And when the sun rose and he changed back, collapsing onto the floor of the cage in his human form, naked and exhausted and covered in sweat, the first thing he said was, "You stayed." Not a question. An observation. A miracle. "I stayed," I confirmed, "and I'll stay tomorrow night too. And the night after that. For as many nights as it takes. You're not alone anymore, Talon. Not ever again." Chapter 9. Breaking the Curse. The witch came back exactly 1 week later, just like she'd promised. This time, she didn't hide or sneak or appear in the middle of the night. She materialized in the great hall at sunset, right in front of me and Talon, with a smile that promised death and suffering and all the worst things she could think of. We were eating dinner, the first meal we'd shared together, sitting at opposite ends of the long table like we were nobles at a feast instead of two people trying to figure out how to save each other. Talon had been telling me a story he'd half remembered about his childhood, something about learning to hunt with his father, his eyes bright with the pleasure of remembering something good for once. And then she appeared, and all the light went out of his face. "Still here?" she said, looking at me like I was an insect she couldn't quite squash, like I was something beneath contempt but too annoying to ignore. How sweet, how foolish, how utterly, devastatingly pointless. Talon stood so fast his chair fell backward, crashing against the stone floor, his body already shifting, already responding to the threat. Gold bleeding into his eyes, claws extending from his fingertips. "Leave her alone," he growled, his voice dropping into something inhuman, something that made the candles flicker and the air feel heavy. "Whatever you want, whatever game you're playing, leave her out of it." The witch laughed, that same cold sound that made my skin crawl. "Or what? You'll attack me? You'll kill me?" "We both know you can't. The curse won't let you. You're bound, Alpha King, bound to suffer. Bound to lose. Bound to die, slowly, while she watches and can't do anything to stop it. That's the beautiful part of the curse, really. Not just that it destroys you, but that it destroys everyone who tries to save you. Every bride who stays long enough to care gets to watch you die, gets to feel like it's her fault, gets to carry that guilt for the rest of her life." She took a step closer, her violet eyes locked on me, ignoring Talon completely now. "But I'll give you a choice, little bride. A real choice. Better than the one he gave those other girls. You can stay and watch him fade, watch him turn into a mindless beast, watch him forget you completely while you're standing right in front of him begging him to remember. Watch him eventually kill you because he doesn't even recognize your face anymore, or you can leave." She paused, letting the word hang in the air, and I saw Talon flinch like she'd struck him. "Walk out those gates," she continued, her voice taking on a falsely sweet tone. "Go back to your village. I'll even sweeten the deal. I'll lift the curse on your village completely. No more fear, no more death, no more sacrifices. Your people will be safe. Your mother will be safe. All those children you care so much about will grow up happy and healthy and never have to send another girl to die in this castle. All you have to do is abandon him. All you have to do is prove that love isn't real, that people are fundamentally selfish, that given the choice between personal happiness and collective good, you'll choose yourself every time. It's not even a hard choice, really. One cursed man you barely know, or hundreds of innocent lives. What's the rational decision here? The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, stealing my breath, making my vision blur. I could feel Talon's body go rigid beside me, could hear the way his breath caught, could sense without looking that he was waiting for my answer, expecting me to take the deal, expecting me to leave. Because why wouldn't I? It was the smart choice. The good choice. The choice that saved lives instead of throwing my own away on a probably impossible curse break that even the witch who cast it said was fake. But I didn't move. I didn't even blink. I just looked at the witch and said, "No." Her smile faltered, confusion crossing her face like I'd spoken in a language she didn't understand. "No?" "No," I repeated louder this time, stronger. "I'm not leaving him. I don't care what you offer. I don't care what you threaten. I don't care if it's rational or smart, or the right thing to do by any measurable standard. I'm staying." The witch's eyes narrowed, and the air around her crackled with magic, green sparks dancing along her fingers, the smell of ozone filling the hall. "You're a fool," she hissed, her beautiful face twisting into something ugly, something that showed the rot underneath the pretty facade. "You think love can break a curse? You think your pathetic feelings matter? You think staying with him changes anything?" "Yes," I said, and I stepped out from behind Talon, standing between him and the witch, even though every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run. "Because you're wrong. The curse can be broken. You said it yourself. A true mate, given freely, can break any curse. And I'm here. I chose him. I chose this. I've seen him at his worst, locked in a cage, barely human, fighting himself every single night. And I'm still here. I've seen the monster, and I love him anyway. So break it. Or admit you're afraid." The witch's face twisted with rage, and for a second I thought she was going to kill me. Thought she was going to reach out with those magic crackling hands and stop my heart, or turn me to ash, or do whatever it is witches do when someone calls their bluff. But then Talon moved. He stepped forward, placing himself between me and the witch, and when he spoke, his voice was different. Stronger, deeper, resonant in a way it hadn't been before, like something inside him had finally clicked into place. The voice of an alpha king. The voice of someone who'd remembered who they were and what they were capable of. "She's right," he said, and even the shadows seemed to listen when he spoke. "The curse is already breaking. I can feel it. I remember now. I remember my name, not Talon, but Kieran. Kieran Shadowmane, Alpha King of the Northern Territories. I remember my pack. I remember the day they chose me as their leader. I remember my father teaching me to hunt, my mother teaching me to lead, my brother challenging me for dominance, and me letting him win because I knew he needed it more than I did." He paused, and I saw tears streaming down his face, but his voice didn't waver. "And I remember you, Morrigan. I remember the day you came to me with your daughter. I remember how you threatened me when I said no, when I told you I couldn't marry someone I didn't love, someone who wasn't my mate. I remember you casting the curse, and I remember thinking it would kill me quickly. But you were smarter than that, weren't you? You made it slow, made it torture, made me forget everything except the one person I'd been waiting for my whole life, so when she finally came, I'd be too broken to keep her." He took another step forward, and his body began to glow, a soft, golden light spreading from his chest outward, covering his skin, his scars, his claws, warming the air around him until I could feel it from where I stood. "You thought you could break me. You thought you could make me nothing. But you were wrong. because she found me, and she chose me, and she stayed even when it would have been easier to run. She sat outside my cage every night and talked to me until I remembered how to be human. She looked at me when I was more monster than man and said, "I'm not running." And that's more powerful than anything you could ever do. The witch screamed, a sound of pure fury, and lunged at him, her hands outstretched, green magic erupting from her fingers in deadly arcs. But the light exploded outward, a wave of pure energy that knocked her back, sent her crashing into the wall hard enough to crack the stone. The green flames extinguished instantly, replaced by warm golden light that filled the entire hall, driving out every shadow, every cold space, every trace of her curse. When the light faded, Kieran, was standing fully human for the first time since I'd met him. No shimmer, no barely contained transformation, no eyes flickering gold, just a man, whole and real and alive. His scars were still there, marking his skin like a map of everything he'd survived, but they didn't look raw anymore. They looked like stories, like proof that he'd fought and won. The witch was gone, vanished. Maybe dead, maybe just defeated badly enough that she'd given up and fled. I didn't care. All I cared about was Kieran. He stood in the center of the great hall, staring at his hands like he didn't recognize them, like he couldn't quite believe what had happened. "Kieran," I said softly, testing the name, and he looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. "I remember everything," he said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I remember my pack, my family, my life before the curse. But most importantly, I remember you. Not just from the dreams. I remember you from before. We met when you were 5 years old. Your father brought you into the wolf territories by accident while hunting, and I found you by the river, crying because you were lost. I walked you back to the boundary and told you that you'd be okay, that you were brave, that you were strong. And you looked up at me with these eyes, these same eyes, and you said, 'Thank you, wolf boy.' I never forgot you. I've been waiting for you ever since." I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what he was saying. But somewhere deep in my memory, buried under years of forgetting, I found it. A boy with golden eyes and a kind smile, walking me through the forest, telling me stories to keep me from being scared, calling me brave when I felt small. And I'd thought he was a dream, thought I'd imagined him during a traumatic experience. But he was real. He'd always been real. "You saved me," I whispered. "You saved me when I was lost, and I didn't even remember." "And you saved me," he said, crossing the hall in 3 long strides and pulling me into his arms, holding me like I was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth, like I was more precious than air or water, or anything else he needed to survive. "You stayed. You chose me. You broke a 15-year curse because you were brave enough to love a monster. You saved me, Aeryn. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." Chapter 10. The Alpha King and his Queen. The transformation of the castle happened overnight. One moment it was beautiful, but abandoned, frozen in time, waiting for something that might never come. The next, it was alive. Wolves appeared from everywhere, hundreds of them, flowing through the gates like a river, like they'd been waiting just beyond the boundaries for the curse to break so they could come home. They were magnificent. Massive creatures with intelligent eyes and fur in every color imaginable, silver and black and russet and white and combinations I'd never seen before. They filled the courtyard, the halls, the rooms that had been empty for 15 years, and they all bowed their heads when Kieran walked past, acknowledging their king, welcoming him home. I stood on the balcony of what was now our shared room, watching the pack arrive, and I felt overwhelmed by all of it. Yesterday I was a nobody from a poor village, a girl sent to die to save her people. Today I was standing in a castle full of magical wolves, and the man I'd agreed to marry was an alpha king who could shift between human and wolf form, who commanded the loyalty of hundreds, who looked at me like I'd hung the moon and stars just for him. It didn't feel real. It felt like I'd stepped into one of my father's stories, the ones he used to tell me about heroes and magic and impossible things that somehow came true. Kieran found me there an hour later, standing at the railing, watching wolves run through the forest below like they were celebrating, like they were finally free after being scattered and lost for so long. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder, and for a moment we just stood there in comfortable silence. "They're here because of you," he said finally. "The pack bonds were shattered when I was cursed, scattered to the winds. But when the curse broke, they felt it, felt me again, felt the pull of their alpha calling them home. And they came. They all came back." His voice was full of wonder, like he still couldn't quite believe it. "What happens now?" I asked because I genuinely didn't know. I'd been so focused on surviving, on helping him survive, that I hadn't thought about what came after. What breaking the curse actually meant for us, for the pack, for my village. "Now," he said, turning me around to face him, his hands cupping my face gently, his gold eyes clear and warm and full of life. "We rebuild. We restore the pack. We teach the young ones who've grown up without proper guidance. We establish territories again, make alliances with the human villages, create peace where there's been fear for so long. We make this place a home again, instead of a prison." He paused, his thumb brushing across my cheek. "And we get married. Properly. With the pack as witnesses. With your mother there if she wants to come. With all the ceremony and tradition and celebration that a true mate bonding deserves." Married. The word still felt strange, but not frightening anymore. Not like it had that first night when I walked up the mountain expecting to die. "My village," I said suddenly, remembering. "The witch said she'd lift the curse on them if I left. But I didn't leave, so—" "Already done," Kieran said, smiling. "The moment the curse on me broke, all her other curses shattered too. Your village is free. They'll wake up tomorrow and realize they haven't been afraid in years, that the fear was artificial, imposed from outside. They'll realize they sacrificed people for no reason, and they'll have to live with that. But they're safe now. You kept them safe, even without taking her deal." I felt something release in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding. They were safe. My mother was safe. The children I'd heard laughing that last night were safe. I hadn't condemned them by choosing to stay. If anything, I'd saved them by breaking the real curse instead of just accepting a witch's bargain that probably had a dozen loopholes anyway. "I want to go back," I said suddenly. "To the village. I want them to see that I'm alive. I want my mother to know I didn't die up here. And I want—" I paused, trying to find the words. "I want them to meet you. The real you. I want them to see that the monster they feared was just a man who'd been hurt, and that the curse they built their fear around was a lie." Kieran studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we'll go. Tomorrow if you want. We'll ride down the mountain with an honor guard, and you can show them that their sacrifice wasn't necessary, that there's a better way to live than in fear and appeasement." He smiled, but there was something sad in it. "Though I don't know if they'll be happy to see me. I may have saved you, but from their perspective, I took you. I demanded a bride and they gave me one. That's not something people forget easily." "Then we'll change the story," I said firmly. "We'll show them something different. We'll show them that love is stronger than fear, that choice is stronger than force, that the world doesn't have to be the way they think it is." The next morning, we rode down the mountain together. Kieran in his human form, dressed like the king he was in clothes that had been stored away for 15 years. Me wearing a dress from the wardrobe in my room, simple but beautiful, the kind of thing I never would have been able to afford in my old life. And behind us, a dozen wolves in their animal forms, moving like silk and shadows, their presence a statement and a promise. "We're here. We're real. We're not the monsters you thought we were." The village saw us coming from miles away, and by the time we reached the square, everyone had gathered. Silent, staring, afraid but curious, confused but hopeful, not sure what to make of the girl they'd sent to die, riding back on a white horse with a king and his wolves. My mother pushed through the crowd, her face pale, her hands shaking, and when she saw me, she collapsed to her knees. I dismounted and ran to her, pulling her into my arms, holding her while she cried and apologized, and said she was sorry over and over again. "I'm okay," I told her. "I'm more than okay. I'm happy. I'm home, Mama. I came home." And I realized as I said it that I meant both places. The village was home because it's where I came from, where my memories lived, where my mother was. But the castle was home too now. Home because that's where Kieran was, where the pack was, where my future waited. Kieran addressed the village then, his voice carrying easily across the square, commanding attention without demanding it. He told them the truth, about the curse, about the witch, about how their fear had been manufactured, their sacrifices unnecessary, their arrangement with a monster nothing but a desperate deal with a curse neither side fully understood. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said. "I don't expect you to forget what you've been through, the fear you've lived with, the people you've lost. But I'm asking for a chance to write a new story, one where humans and wolves live in peace, one where villages prosper under our protection, instead of cowering under our shadow, one where no one has to sacrifice their children to appease powers they don't understand." The elder stepped forward, the same old man who'd decided to send me up the mountain. He looked at Kieran, then at me, then back at Kieran. "Why should we trust you?" he asked. "Why should we believe this isn't just another form of control?" "Because," I said, stepping forward before Kieran could answer, "I'm still here. I went up that mountain expecting to die, and instead I found someone worth living for. I stayed not because I had to, but because I chose to. And if a poor village girl with no power and no status can choose an alpha king and have him choose her back, then anything is possible. Then the old rules don't apply anymore. Then we can build something new." The elder looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something change in his face. Respect, maybe, or understanding, or just recognition that the girl he'd sent away had come back as someone different, someone who'd faced the worst and come out stronger. "Then we'll try," he said finally. "We'll try this new story and see if it holds." And it did. It does. We rebuilt everything. The castle, the pack, the relationships between wolves and humans. It took time. It took work. It took patience and forgiveness, and a willingness to believe that people can change, that curses can be broken, that love really is stronger than fear. But we did it. Kieran and I married 3 months later in a ceremony that blended wolf tradition and human custom, with my mother crying happy tears, and the pack howling their approval, and half the village attending because they wanted to see the girl who tamed a monster marry the king, who was never really a monster at all. I wore a dress made of silver silk that caught the moonlight, and Kieran wore the ceremonial armor of his pack, and when we said our vows, I felt the mate bond snap into place like it had always been there, just waiting for us to acknowledge it, waiting for us to choose each other completely. My village thrived, the children grew strong, the crops flourished, and when people asked me if I missed my old life, I laughed, because I'd never had a life before. I'd only had survival, only had fear and poverty and the grinding weight of existing without purpose. Now I had a kingdom. Now I had a mate who looked at me like I was the reason the sun rose. Now I had a pack that called me their queen. Now I had a future that stretched out before me full of possibility. And most importantly, I had a story. The story of the girl who agreed to marry a monster and found a king. The story of the curse that couldn't break love. The story of how one choice, one moment of courage, one decision to stay instead of run, changed everything. That story was mine. And it was just beginning. Because curses break, but love doesn't. Because fear is temporary, but courage echoes. Because sometimes the monster turns out to be the man you were always meant to find, and the sacrifice turns out to be the greatest gift you ever received. And because in the end, the most powerful magic isn't what witches cast, or what curses impose. It's what two people create when they choose each other against all odds, when they stay when it would be easier to run, when they see each other fully, the broken parts and the beautiful parts, and say, yes, this, you, always. That's the magic that matters. That's the magic that lasts, and that's the magic that Kieran and I built together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time, until the castle that had been a prison became a home. The curse became a memory, and the monster and the sacrifice became the king and queen who ruled with wisdom and compassion for 100 years. Our story doesn't end here. It's still being written. But this chapter is complete. And it ends with the words I never thought I'd get to say when I walked up that mountain with ash in my hair and fear in my heart. We lived happily ever after. Not perfectly, not without challenges, but together. Always together. And that made all the difference. The end.